The ship creaked in the silence of the night, its massive frame slicing through the dark waters. Inside, the guests were unaware of the storm brewing below deck. Charles Harrison, the millionaire with secrets no one could afford to learn, had just boarded the Corinthian Queen, and he was already a dead man walking. As the evening wore on, whispers passed between passengers, the air thick with unspoken tension. But by morning, the man who thought he had control would be found lifeless in his cabin, his fate sealed by the very people he trusted. No one on board knew who had killed him yet. But one thing was certain. The game had begun. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The morning air in New York City was thick with the promise of an unusually warm day, even for late spring. The streets hummed with the usual noise, the honking of taxis, the rhythm of hurried footsteps, and the occasional clatter of a delivery cart. But inside the brownstone at 601 West 35th Street, all was still. Nero Wolfe, the reclusive detective known for his towering intellect and complete disdain for physical exertion, sat in his comfortable chair. His large frame, usually clad in his well-worn brown suit, seemed even more imposing in the quiet of the room. He was deep in thought as usual, his eyes fixed on a book of orchids, his one true passion outside of solving cases. His assistant, Archie Goodwin, stood nearby, watching the man who seemed to live in a world apart from the chaos of the city. "Archie, stop hovering," Wolfe muttered, without looking up from the pages. "Your constant presence is as distracting as a buzzing fly." Archie leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets. "If only I could get a bit of that patience, Wolfe. I'm getting bored just watching you smell those flowers all day." "You need a good case." And soon, Wolfe grunted but didn't respond. He wasn't interested in the kind of cases Archie wanted, the ones that involved running around New York like a dog chasing a car. No, Wolfe preferred the mental puzzles, the ones that required methodical thinking and, most importantly, little physical activity. That was the appeal of his work. Just as he turned a page, the doorbell rang, shattering the peaceful silence. Archie, always quick on his feet, answered it and ushered in a tall, well-dressed woman who looked as if she'd just stepped out of a high society event. She had a composed air, but something about the way she held herself suggested she was more than a little troubled. Her eyes, sharp but wary, flicked around the room before settling on Wolfe. "I've come to hire you, Mr. Wolfe," she said in a clear, steady voice. Wolfe, unperturbed, didn't look up immediately. He was still absorbed in the orchid book. Archie shot him a look, signaling for him to engage with the visitor. "A case?" Wolfe finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "What kind of case requires my attention?" The woman seemed to steel herself. "It's about a murder. On the Corinthian Queen. A luxury liner, mister." "Wolfe, my husband was found dead, and the authorities are calling it an accident, but I know better. I've already hired a few detectives, but none of them seem to be able to get to the truth." Wolfe finally looked up, his eyes locking onto hers, sharp as ever. "Murder, you say? On a ship?" "Yes," she nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "My husband, Charles Harrison, was a well-known businessman. He was found in his cabin, his throat slit. The police say it was a robbery gone wrong, but I don't believe that. He didn't have enemies, at least none, that would do something like this." "There's more to the story, Mr. Wolfe. I'm sure of it." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered her words. A murder on a luxury liner was no ordinary case. The suspects were likely far more sophisticated than the usual crop of petty criminals he was used to dealing with. But the challenge, yes, that piqued his interest. "I'll take your case, Mrs. Harrison," Wolfe said, his voice a calm promise. "But I do so on my terms. I do not leave this house unless absolutely necessary. Everything I need to know I will obtain from my desk. You, Miss Harrison, will handle any physical travel and communication that may be required." The woman's face hardened for a brief moment, as if she was about to protest. But then, perhaps realizing there was little use in arguing with a man of Wolfe's reputation, she nodded. "I understand, Mr. Wolfe. Whatever it takes, Archie, ever the practical one, couldn't resist a quip. I'll be your man at the ground then. Just tell me where to go, and I'll do the legwork." Wolfe nodded, a slight smirk pulling at the corner of his lips. "Very well, Archie. You will accompany Mrs. Harrison to the ship, investigate the scene, and gather the facts. I'll await your findings here." Mrs. Harrison shifted her weight uneasily, but she trusted Wolfe. After all, no one in New York, hell in the world, could match his brilliance in solving crimes. And if anyone could uncover the truth about her husband's mysterious death, it was Nero Wolfe. "Good," she said. "I'll go prepare." "We'll leave for the ship immediately." As she turned to leave, Wolfe called after her, his voice cool and detached. "I will require full access to your late husband's affairs, including his business and personal relationships." "We need to know everything?" Mrs. Harrison nodded, her expression softening. "I'll arrange it." With the door closing behind her, Wolfe turned his attention back to his orchids, but not before Archie could comment. "You know, Wolfe," Archie said, "I have a feeling this one's going to be a real puzzle." Wolfe said nothing, but the faint glimmer in his eyes was enough to suggest that the game was already afoot. Chapter 2. The Ship's Secrets. The Corinthian Queen was a marvel of modern engineering, sleek, luxurious, and towering above the waves like a floating city. As Wolfe had already made clear, he wasn't interested in stepping foot on the ship. Instead, it was left to Archie to get the lay of the land, or in this case, the decks. The morning after Mrs. Harrison's visit, Archie found himself standing at the dock, staring up at the vessel with a mix of awe and distaste. The ship was impressive, certainly, but it wasn't the kind of place he felt comfortable. The passengers were all high society types, the kind who could trace their wealth back to families that had long since stopped needing to work. But that didn't faze Archie. He had his own way of dealing with people. "Never seen so much cash in one place," he muttered to himself as he boarded the gangplank, checking in with the ship's concierge. The woman behind the desk was too eager to help, flashing a bright smile that made Archie wonder just what kind of secrets she might be hiding. "You must be Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice almost syrupy. "The famous right-hand man of Mr. Wolfe, of course. We've been expecting you. The captain is waiting for you in his office." "Great," Archie replied, faking a smile. "Lead the way." They walked through the opulent interior of the ship, the polished marble floors gleaming under the chandeliers, and the faint scent of fresh flowers wafting through the air. Archie couldn't help but feel out of place among the glitz and glamour. This was a world he didn't belong to, but that didn't stop him from doing his job. He was led into the captain's office, where Captain Richard Harris, a tall man in his mid-50s, was waiting. He was dressed in the crisp, navy blue uniform that had seen better days, his face a mixture of exhaustion and indifference. "Mr. Goodwin?" The captain greeted him, extending a hand. I trust you're here on Mr. Wolfe's behalf. That's right, Archie said, shaking the captain's hand firmly. I've got a few questions about the murder. Harris nodded, his eyes darting briefly to the window overlooking the sea before returning to Archie. I'll tell you what I can, but I'll warn you now, it's been a bit of a mess. I'm used to messes, Archie replied, settling into one of the chairs across from the captain's desk. He pulled out a small notebook, ready to take down any useful information. Let's start with the basics. What happened exactly? The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. Charles Harrison was found dead in his cabin. The authorities believe it was a robbery gone wrong, but I don't buy it. Nothing was missing from the cabin, and the man was well liked by most of the passengers and crew. He was in his 50s, you know, no enemies to speak of. But he hesitated for a moment before continuing. I think someone on board wanted him dead. Any suspects? Archie asked, his pen poised over the notebook. Several, Harris said, his voice low. But no one who sticks out clearly. That's why I called Mr. Wolfe. I need someone who can see through the smoke and mirrors. Tell me about the victim, Archie pressed. What was Harrison doing on board this ship? Was it business or something else? Harris leaned back in his chair, staring out the window again. Harrison was on a business trip, but there was talk, just talk, that he'd been meeting with a few people, some of whom might have had more personal interests in mind. He wasn't a saint, you know. In fact, his reputation wasn't exactly stellar, but he wasn't the type to get involved in anything messy, at least not in front of people. Not the type to make enemies. Archie nodded, scribbling down notes. I'll need to speak with the passengers. You said several were suspects? Of course, Harris replied. I've already had the crew go through the list of passengers. But it's hard to get anything concrete from people who live in their own world, away from the rest of us. Archie knew exactly what Harris meant. The passengers on the Corinthian Queen were the kind of people who could easily afford to be above reproach, to hide behind their wealth and reputation. Still, he had a job to do. Mind if I take a look at Harrison's cabin? Archie asked. The captain hesitated, but then nodded. Sure, but I'll warn you, there's not much to see. The police have already been through it. That's fine, Archie said. I'll take whatever I can get. The cabin. After the brief conversation with the captain, Archie was led down narrow hallways, past luxurious suites that seemed more like apartments than rooms on a ship. The air was thick with the smell of fresh sea air and expensive cologne. They arrived at Harrison's cabin, the door open with a few officers lingering nearby. The cabin itself was nothing special, well furnished with a large bed, a writing desk, and a small sitting area. But there was one thing that struck Archie immediately: the lack of struggle. It didn't look like a robbery gone wrong at all. The victim hadn't fought back. There was no sign of a break-in either. Everything was neatly arranged, just as one would expect from a man who cared about his surroundings. Harrison had been alone, and the killer had struck without warning, without resistance. Archie's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the desk. Papers, some scattered, some neatly stacked, covered it. One in particular caught his eye. A letter with the name of a high-profile business associate circled in red ink. Huh, Archie murmured, pocketing the letter for later. The conversation with the crew. After leaving the cabin, Archie went to speak with a few members of the crew who had been on shift the night of the murder. He met with the few cabin stewards, waitstaff, and even the ship's doctor who had attended to Harrison's body before the police arrived. Nothing out of the ordinary, said Martin, the head waiter. Mr. Harrison was a regular guest, quiet man. He mostly kept to himself, no late-night parties or strange visitors. Anyone acting suspicious? Archie pressed. Suspicious? Martin repeated, eyebrows knitting. Not really. But there was one thing. He leaned in, lowering his voice. I overheard something between Harrison and a woman last night. Something about a deal, something that could ruin someone. That's interesting, Archie said, already taking down notes. The twist. As the day wore on, Archie spoke to more crew members, but nothing concrete came from it. He was about to head back to Wolfe with the information he had gathered when one of the ship's officers approached him with something that would change the course of the investigation. We found this, the officer said, handing Archie a small tarnished key. It doesn't belong to any of the cabins. It was found in the vicinity of Harrison's suite. Archie examined the key carefully. It was small, unmarked, and looked out of place on a ship like the Corinthian Queen. He had seen enough to know that this was no ordinary piece of metal. It was a clue. The plot was thickening. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Archie knew one thing for certain. The murder aboard the Corinthian Queen was only the beginning, and Nero Wolfe, with his brilliant mind, was the only one who could untangle the lies and deceit hiding in plain sight. Chapter 3. The Passengers. The following day, Archie returned to the Corinthian Queen. The key he'd discovered in Harrison's cabin gnawed at him, its significance still unclear. But before he could make sense of it, there was one more piece of the puzzle to uncover: the passengers. Wolfe had insisted that they be interviewed thoroughly, and while Archie wasn't one to miss an opportunity to play detective, he knew the task ahead would be a tough one. These people were used to their status, to being untouchable. He'd have to be clever to get anything useful from them. The first interview. Mrs. Helen Ashford. The first person Archie visited was Mrs. Helen Ashford, a widow of considerable wealth. She was known for her sharp wit and social standing, always surrounded by a coterie of admirers. Her cabin was grand, with silk curtains and an expensive fragrance in the air, making it obvious she was used to luxury. Archie knocked softly before entering. Mrs. Ashford was seated by the window, a glass of champagne in her hand, looking out over the sea. "Mr. Goodwin, I presume?" she said, without turning. "How utterly predictable of you. Always the ones who want to know what's going on." "That's why I'm here, Mrs. Ashford," Archie said, slipping into a chair. "I'm investigating the death of Charles Harrison. I was hoping you could help me understand a few things." She glanced at him, raising an eyebrow, and then set the glass down. "A man of little taste, if you ask me. The poor thing didn't have a clue when it came to socializing, though I suppose that's common for men like him. But no, I never paid him much attention." "Did you speak with him recently?" Archie asked. "Speak? Of course not. I don't waste time on those who are beneath me," she said with a dismissive wave. "Though I did overhear him talking to that woman, the one who looks like she wants something from him. I can't quite remember her name, but she was certainly trying to make her way into his good graces." Archie made a note of it. "Anything unusual about the way he acted?" "No," Mrs. Ashford replied coolly. "Though, now that you mention it, he did seem preoccupied the last couple of days. Fidgeting with his papers, muttering to himself. But then, I suppose we all do that when we're worried about something." Archie leaned forward. "Anything about a deal? Any threats?" Her eyes flickered, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "I'm sure you're mistaken, Mr. Goodwin. I think you'll find that Mr. Harrison didn't make any enemies. The man just had bad taste in friends." That's all. Archie knew he wouldn't get more from her today. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford," he said, standing up. "I'll leave you to your thoughts." As he left her cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Mrs. Ashford's involvement. The woman was as sharp as a tack, and something in her eyes told him she was hiding something. Still, there was no immediate evidence to tie her to Harrison's murder. But Archie wasn't ready to rule her out just yet. The second interview. Mr. Samuel Graves. Next, Archie sought out Mr. Samuel Graves, a businessman of moderate success but known for his connections. Graves was slightly older, in his mid-60s, and had a reputation for being ruthless in his dealings, though he preferred to keep a low profile when not actively making deals. His cabin was the opposite of Mrs. Ashford's, modestly furnished but with a desk littered with paperwork, as if he were always working, even during his time on the ship. Graves welcomed Archie with a handshake, a firm grip that betrayed his confidence. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm aware of why you're here," he said, motioning for Archie to sit. "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly." Archie wasted no time. "Mr. Graves, you were familiar with Charles Harrison?" "Familiar?" Graves smirked. "I knew him well enough. He was a businessman just like me. Always trying to make deals, always trying to climb the ladder. We shared a few mutual interests. Nothing major, though. No real friends in common, and certainly no enemies." "Really?" Archie pressed, picking up a glass of water from the table and swirling it absently. "Because Mrs. Ashford told me Harrison was quite preoccupied the last few days. You don't seem to be worried at all." Graves smiled again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Why would I be worried? A man like Harrison didn't concern me. If he had problems, I'm sure he brought them on himself. If you ask me, he was an amateur, always trying to play with the big leagues, but never quite understanding the rules." "Could you think of any reason why someone might want to kill him?" Archie asked, his voice dropping just a bit to catch Graves off guard. The businessman's face tightened for a moment, then he composed himself. "Not really, Goodwin. But if I had to guess, it would be one of his less respectable friends. He had a habit of keeping company with the wrong people." Archie made a mental note. "Anything more specific? Someone he'd been arguing with?" Graves paused, his expression shifting. "No," he said, but there was hesitation in his voice. "But now that you mention it, there was a woman." "Yes. He was meeting with her several times before he died. Didn't seem like a professional arrangement, more personal if you know what I mean." "Do you know her name?" "No, I don't believe I ever caught it." "Thanks, Mr. Graves," Archie said, standing up. "I'll let you get back to your work." Graves gave a nod, but his eyes lingered on Archie for a moment too long, as if silently warning him to tread carefully. The third interview. Miss Marjorie Pollock. Archie's next stop was a woman who had kept a relatively low profile on the ship. Miss Marjorie Pollock, a young socialite with a passion for art and an uncanny ability to stay in the background. She was often seen sketching on the deck or reading, but never involved in the larger social circles that surrounded the other passengers. Her cabin, small but quaint, was filled with art supplies, sketches of the ship's interior, and the occasional open book. She was sitting by the window, her sketchbook open, but when Archie knocked, she closed it quickly. "Mr. Goodwin," she greeted him with a soft voice, her eyes betraying a certain nervousness. "I've heard about what happened. I hope you're not thinking I had anything to do with it. I barely knew Mr. Harrison." Archie smiled reassuringly, though he could tell she was on edge. I'm not accusing anyone, Miss Pollock. I just need to ask a few questions. You knew Harrison, yes? I did, she said quietly. He was one of the passengers who would talk to me occasionally, mostly about the art on board. He had a way of making people think he was interested in their lives, but I knew better. He wasn't a particularly kind man. What do you mean by that? Just that he was distant, Mr. Goodwin. He'd charm everyone with his smile, but there was something cold about him. I could see it in his eyes. That's why I stopped talking to him after a while. I didn't want to get involved with someone like that. Did he say anything unusual in the days leading up to his death? Archie asked. Miss Pollock hesitated before answering. He was nervous. The last time I saw him, he was looking over his shoulder as if he were expecting someone. He muttered something about a deal that could change everything, but he never finished the sentence. Archie's interest piqued. A deal? What kind of deal? She shook her head. I don't know, he didn't say. But I think it was something that involved a lot of money. Maybe that's what got him killed. The suspicion grows. After the interviews, Archie had a clearer picture of the passengers and their relationships with Harrison. But each one was holding something back, hiding behind polished facades and veiled words. Mrs. Ashford's disdain, Graves's indifference, and Pollock's uneasy silence all pointed to one thing. Someone on this ship had a secret, and it was linked to Harrison's death. As he walked back to his cabin, the key from Harrison's room still in his pocket, Archie couldn't shake the feeling that the murder was tied to more than just money or a personal vendetta. There was something larger at play, and he had a sinking feeling that Wolfe would have him peeling back layers of deception for days to come. Chapter 4. The First Twist. The morning after his interviews with the passengers, Archie stood in front of Wolfe's desk, the familiar weight of the case pressing on his shoulders. The office was quiet, as always, the silence punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of Wolfe's papers, or the low hum of the air conditioning. Wolfe, as usual, was deep in thought, reading through some orchid catalog, completely uninterested in the events of the outside world. But today, that would change. Well, Archie, Wolfe said, without looking up, his voice sharp and expectant. Do tell me that you have something of value. Archie sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sat down opposite Wolfe. I've got some new leads, but nothing concrete. The passengers are all playing their cards close to the chest. Mrs. Ashford's got a vendetta against Harrison, Graves is as slippery as a greased eel, and Pollock, well, she's the nervous type, but I can tell she knows more than she's saying. Wolfe didn't react at first. He simply turned the page of his catalog with a slow, deliberate movement. Then he set the catalog down, finally meeting Archie's gaze. Is that it, Archie? You mean to tell me that nothing has come to light after all your prying? Archie's frustration was palpable, but he controlled it. Look, Wolfe, there's something odd about all of this. Harrison was in the middle of some kind of deal. Maybe it was business, maybe personal, but he was mixed up in something shady. I can't put my finger on it yet. All the passengers are acting like they have something to hide, but none of them are willing to say anything too direct. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. That's hardly surprising. People rarely tell the truth when they're trying to conceal something, but you should try a different approach. Perhaps you're missing something. Archie didn't respond immediately. Wolfe was right, of course. The answer was often hidden in plain sight, and his hasty assumptions were leading him in the wrong direction. But he didn't have time to dwell on that now. He needed more information, and more importantly, he needed action. Anything else? Wolfe prompted, as though he could read Archie's thoughts. Archie shifted in his chair. Well, I did find something interesting. While I was speaking with Graves, he mentioned a woman who had been meeting with Harrison. He didn't know her name, but I got the feeling it was more than just business. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. A woman, you say? Yeah, Archie replied. It wasn't the first time I'd heard about her. Pollock mentioned her too. She seems to be central to this whole thing. I think she might know more than she's letting on. Wolfe sat up straighter, his mind already working. Then go and speak to her again. This woman could be the key to unlocking this entire mess. A shocking discovery. After Wolfe's words, Archie made his way back to the Corinthian Queen, the key to Harrison's cabin still burning a hole in his pocket. He had to find this woman, whoever she was, and learn what she knew about Harrison's deal and his death. But as he stepped aboard the ship, something unexpected happened. One of the officers rushed up to him, his face pale and tense. Mr. Goodwin, we need you right away. There's been another death. Archie's heart sank. Another one? Who? The captain, the officer said in a hushed voice. Captain Harris. He's been found dead in his cabin. The shock of Captain Harris's death. The news hit Archie harder than he expected. He had only spoken with Captain Harris the day before, and the man had seemed as composed as anyone could be. The idea that someone had taken him out too sent a chill down Archie's spine. What was happening on this ship? They rushed to the captain's quarters, where the body was already being examined by the ship's doctor. Harris was slumped in his chair, dead from what appeared to be poisoning, though there was no immediate sign of the poison itself. The doctor was still conducting his examination, but Archie could see the telltale signs of death. The pale skin, the slight bloating of the face. Whoever had killed Harris had done so with careful precision, just as they had with Harrison. Archie stood over the body, trying to make sense of it all. 2 murders. Both men were seemingly well-liked, but caught up in something much darker. And it had to be related to the passengers, especially that mysterious woman. But before he could investigate further, the officer handed him a small envelope that had been found near Harris's body. Archie opened it carefully, recognizing the handwriting instantly. It was addressed to Mr. Charles Harrison. The letter inside was brief but chilling. You're running out of time. Meet me tonight or everything ends. No signature, just a warning. And Archie's mind immediately went back to the mysterious woman. Was she involved in both murders? Was she the one behind it all? The stakes get higher. Back in Wolfe's office, Archie couldn't contain his excitement. He had been right. This case was bigger than just a simple murder on a cruise ship. It was turning into something much more dangerous. Wolfe, Archie said, almost breathless. You won't believe this, but Captain Harris is dead. Poisoned just like Harrison. And I found a letter on the captain's desk. It was addressed to Harrison and it had a warning. You're running out of time. Wolfe's face remained unreadable, but Archie could see the sharpness in his eyes as he processed the information. So we have a serial killer on our hands, and they're not stopping with Harrison. What about the woman? Have you learned anything more about her? Not yet, Archie admitted, but I've got a feeling she's at the center of this. I'm going to speak to her again. There's something she's hiding, and I'm going to get it out of her. Wolfe stood, his chair creaking under his weight. Be cautious, Archie. This case is far more complicated than you realize. And there's one thing we know for sure. If this killer is still on board, they will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. The tension mounts. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the minute. The ship, once a luxurious escape for the wealthy, had now become a prison of sorts. Archie felt the weight of the case pressing on him. He needed to find answers, and fast, before there was yet another body to deal with. As he prepared to confront the mysterious woman again, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The tension in the air was thick, and every passenger, every crew member now seemed like a potential threat. The walls of the Corinthian Queen were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the killer made their next move. Chapter 5. Hidden Motives. The sun had barely set over the shimmering waters as Archie walked briskly down the long, polished corridors of the Corinthian Queen. The events of the last 48 hours weighed heavily on him. The double murder of Charles Harrison and Captain Harris, the cryptic letter, and the increasingly suspicious behavior of the passengers. Something wasn't right, and Archie was determined to get to the bottom of it. He had made his way back to the cabin of Mrs. Helen Ashford. But this time, he wasn't going to let her sidestep the truth. The woman was no stranger to manipulation, and he knew her role in this case was far from innocent. She had too many details locked away, too many evasive answers. Her disdain for Harrison, the coldness of her tone when discussing him, it all seemed too calculated. The confrontation with Mrs. Ashford, Archie knocked on her cabin door with more force than he intended, the sound echoing down the hallway. A few moments passed and the door swung open. Mrs. Ashford stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing when she saw who it was. "Mr. Goodwin?" she said, her voice clipped. "Back again so soon? What is it now?" "I need to speak with you, Mrs. Ashford," Archie replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "This isn't just about your vendetta anymore. This is about Harrison's death. And I think you know more than you're letting on." She recoiled, but only slightly, before regaining her composure. "I told you before, I hardly knew the man." "Not true," Archie countered, crossing the room with measured steps. "You knew him well enough to call him a man of bad taste. You didn't just dislike him. You despised him. Why?" Her eyes flicked toward the window, her gaze distant as if looking for a way to escape the question. "I had my reasons," she said, her voice quiet now. "But they're irrelevant." "Really?" Archie pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Because I think they're very relevant. You didn't just speak badly about him. You spoke as though you knew something dark about him. You knew things he was involved in, things he wanted to keep hidden. Now I want to know what those things were. I think you and Harrison were tangled up in something dangerous." Mrs. Ashford's lips parted, but no words came out at first. She seemed to weigh her options carefully, considering whether or not she could continue to play her games with him. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold as ice. "Fine," she said, her eyes never meeting his. "Harrison and I had business dealings. Nothing criminal, mind you, but enough to make me wary of him. He had connections, dangerous connections, people who didn't take kindly to being crossed. That's all I'll say." "Who are these people, Mrs. Ashford?" Who was Harrison involved with? But before she could answer, the ship's intercom crackled to life, interrupting their conversation. "Mr. Goodwin, please report to the captain's quarters immediately," the voice said. "We have an urgent matter to discuss." Archie hesitated for a moment, his instincts telling him to press further. But Mrs. Ashford's cold demeanor sent a chill through him. Whatever she knew, she wasn't going to reveal it easily. "I'll be back, Mrs. Ashford," Archie said curtly. "And when I return, I expect some answers." With that, he turned and left the cabin, heading toward the captain's quarters, with a sense of dread settling in his stomach. A new revelation. When Archie arrived at the captain's quarters, he was met with a scene of chaos. The room was filled with officers, crew members, and a few anxious-looking passengers. The atmosphere was tense, thick with confusion and fear. Archie's eyes scanned the room quickly, settling on one of the officers who was standing near the desk. "What's going on here?" Archie asked, his voice rising above the murmurs. The officer, a young man with a nervous look, nodded toward the desk where a piece of paper was spread out. "We've just found this, Mr. Goodwin." The officer handed the paper to Archie, who quickly scanned it. It was a list. Names, amounts, and brief notes beside each entry. The names were mostly unfamiliar, but there was one that stood out: Harrison. And beside his name were several figures and a note that read, "Final payment to be made." "Who's behind this list?" Archie demanded. "What is this, a ledger?" "Yes," the officer confirmed. "We believe it's a list of financial transactions, possibly linked to illegal activities. It seems Harrison was involved with these people. But there's more." Archie raised an eyebrow. "More." The officer led him to the side, pulling him away from the others. "We found this document in Captain Harris's desk, hidden in a drawer. It's clear Harris was involved in whatever Harrison was doing. But this list, it's not just a list of names. We think it's a list of people Harrison was blackmailing." "Blackmailing?" Archie repeated, his mind racing. "Harrison was blackmailing people, and Harris was in on it?" The officer nodded. "It looks that way. We've already alerted the higher-ups, but we need to get to the bottom of this fast. If Harris was involved, there's a bigger conspiracy at play here. And if Harrison was mixed up in this, it could explain why he's dead, and why Captain Harris is too." The game takes a dark turn. Archie's mind was spinning. He had suspected Harrison was involved in something dangerous, but this was a whole new level. Blackmail? A financial web of crime and corruption? The stakes had just been raised, and Archie knew he needed to bring this information back to Wolfe. As Archie was about to leave the captain's quarters, the officer stopped him. "Mr. Goodwin, one more thing. We found a hidden compartment in Captain Harris's desk. Inside it was a small, old-fashioned key. We believe it may be the key to something important." "A key?" Archie asked, taking the small metal object from the officer. "Where does it lead?" The officer shook his head. "We don't know, but it's strange. It doesn't match any locks on the ship. We think it could be for something off board." Archie tucked the key into his pocket. "I'll look into it. Thanks." As he turned to leave, Archie's thoughts were racing. The case had taken a dark and unexpected turn. Harrison's death, Captain Harris's murder, the blackmail. The deeper Archie dug, the more tangled the web became. But one thing was clear. Someone was trying to cover up a scandal of monumental proportions. And Archie was going to find out who was behind it, no matter what it took. Chapter 6. The Master's Method. By the time Archie returned to Wolfe's brownstone that evening, the weight of the case felt even heavier than before. He had barely stepped through the door when Wolfe, still seated in his chair, turned his sharp gaze on him. "Well, Archie," Wolfe asked, his voice cool and controlled, betraying no hint of impatience despite the urgency of the situation. "What have you discovered?" Archie tossed the small key onto Wolfe's desk, his brow furrowing as he took a seat opposite his boss. "More than I bargained for, Wolfe. Harrison's murder isn't just a random act of violence. It's tied to something much bigger. The list I found in Captain Harris's desk proves it." Wolfe leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the key. A list? Of what, exactly? Blackmail, Archie replied, his voice tinged with disbelief. Harrison was involved in some pretty serious stuff. He had names, people he was blackmailing. People with power. But it gets worse, Wolfe. Captain Harris was involved in it too. They were both mixed up in something dangerous. And I think that's why they're both dead. Wolfe's expression remained unreadable. He took the key in his hands, turning it over thoughtfully, his fingers brushing across the metal surface as though it held the answers to all the questions they'd been asking. Interesting, Wolfe said, his voice low and deliberate. Very interesting. You say Harrison was blackmailing people with power. What were they being blackmailed for? I don't know yet, Archie admitted, but there's one thing I'm sure of. Whoever killed Harrison doesn't want the truth getting out. I found this key in Harris's desk, hidden away in a compartment. It doesn't match any lock in the ship, and I don't think it's even for something on board. I think it's a key to something off the ship. Something Harris and Harrison were trying to protect. Wolfe was silent for a moment, considering the implications of Archie's words. His mind worked through the possibilities as Archie waited, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. Wolfe wasn't one to be easily impressed, but when he spoke again, his voice was thick with purpose. We need to stop chasing shadows and focus on the facts, Wolfe said, his tone decisive. The key is a clue, but it will not lead us to the truth by itself. We must dig deeper into Harrison's life, and particularly into the relationships he had with the passengers and crew. As for this mysterious woman you keep referring to, she is at the center of this web, I'm certain of it, but we must tread carefully. The game is not just about finding a murderer, it's about exposing a dangerous network. Exactly, Archie said, standing up. I'm going to find this woman. If she's involved in this mess, we need her to talk. But I think there's something else we're missing. Someone on that ship has been lying, intentionally misleading me. They know more than they're letting on. Wolfe's sharp eyes flicked to the stack of papers on his desk. Then you'll go back, Archie. But this time, I want you to approach it differently. I want you to observe, not just listen. Look for the lies, the inconsistencies in their stories. Everyone aboard that ship has something to hide. We just need to find the right person to crack. The approach. As Archie made his way back to the Corinthian Queen, he couldn't shake the weight of Wolfe's words. Observe, not just listen. It was a simple instruction, but it meant that Archie had to change the way he was looking at the case. The passengers weren't just suspects, they were pieces on a chessboard. Each move calculated, each lie deliberate. When he boarded the ship once again, he headed straight for the main dining room, where several of the passengers were gathered, talking amongst themselves. He immediately spotted Mrs. Ashford as expected and decided to start with her. He approached her quietly, sitting down across from her at the table. Mrs. Ashford, Archie began, his tone casual. I was thinking about our conversation earlier. You mentioned Harrison's connections, about how he'd been involved with dangerous people. Could you elaborate on that? She glanced at him, her eyes hardening slightly. I told you what I know, Mr. Goodwin, she replied coolly, as if dismissing his inquiry. You'll have to ask someone else if you're looking for more details. But Archie wasn't fooled. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I've got a theory, Mrs. Ashford. I think Harrison was blackmailing people with money and influence. I think he got too close to something dark. And you know more than you're letting on. Her gaze flickered, and for a brief moment, her mask slipped. But just as quickly, she composed herself. Her voice smooth once more. "You're wrong, Mr. Goodwin. I don't know anything about blackmail. And frankly, I'm tired of being questioned. If you want to solve this murder, go talk to someone else." Archie wasn't deterred. He stood up and left her, moving across the room to a small group of passengers. He had to speak to everyone, but not just through casual questioning. This time, he needed to look for signs, for hidden reactions, for the truth beneath the words. The crew's secrets. Next, Archie decided to speak with some of the crew members who had been with Harrison the night of his death. He found a young waiter named Marco, who had been working in the dining room. Marco seemed nervous, his eyes darting about as if searching for an escape. "Marco, I've got a few questions for you," Archie began, his tone friendly yet sharp. "You served Mr. Harrison that night, didn't you?" "Yes, sir," Marco replied quickly, wiping his hands on his apron. I remember him. He was with the woman, I think. They had a heated conversation, but I don't know what about. Did you overhear anything important?" Archie asked, watching Marco closely. The young man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, he seemed agitated. He was saying something about a deal. Something about it being too late, and that the other party wouldn't forgive him if he didn't follow through." "Who was this woman?" Archie pressed, leaning in. "I don't know," Marco said quickly, his face flushing. "She was older than him, but she was very familiar with him. They seemed close. She wasn't one of the passengers, though. I've never seen her before." Archie's mind raced. Did they argue? Was it serious? "Yes, but I couldn't make out all the words," Marco admitted. "They kept their voices low, but I remember hearing her say something about being paid, and something about getting it done tonight." "Thank you, Marco," Archie said, his mind whirring. This was the lead he needed. He had to find this woman, and quickly. The final piece. As Archie left the dining room, he knew what he had to do next. The woman was real, she had to be. She was tied to Harrison's death, and now Marco had given him the last clue. She was someone familiar to Harrison, someone with the financial interest in his silence. It was time to bring her out into the open. As the night grew darker, Archie's sense of urgency increased. Wolfe had given him a plan. Observe, not just listen. And now, the time had come to confront the one person who could end it all. The woman. Whoever she was. Chapter 7. The culprit's confession or not. The tension in the air was palpable as Archie stood outside the Corinthian Queen's grand ballroom where the passengers were gathered for a formal dinner. He had learned more than enough to know that someone aboard this ship knew exactly what had happened to Charles Harrison and Captain Harris. The woman he had been searching for, the one with the mysterious ties to Harrison and the blackmail, was somewhere within this crowd. But, as always, finding the truth required patience, and patience was not one of Archie's strong suits. Still, he had learned that the best way to get to the heart of the matter wasn't through interrogations, but by observing and waiting for a moment of weakness. Archie glanced over his shoulder and spotted Mrs. Helen Ashford, dressed in an elaborate gown, conversing with a group of well-to-do passengers. She caught his eye and flashed him a tight smile. Her behavior had been oddly evasive from the start, but now, with all the pieces falling into place, Archie was convinced she had more to reveal. But it wasn't just Ashford. There were others, Graves, Pollock, the crew. Everyone had a role to play in this twisted game. However, it wasn't until he spotted the woman The one who had been meeting Harrison in secret, that his stomach dropped. She was standing near the edge of the ballroom, looking out at the ocean through the grand windows, seemingly lost in thought. Her name was Elena Moreau, and she was as beautiful as she was mysterious. As Archie approached her, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the case pressing down on him. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. He had to confront her, but he needed to do it in a way that would make her talk. So instead of rushing in with questions, he decided to play the game. He stepped closer, offering a casual smile. "Miss Moreau," he began, his voice low but confident. "I've been hoping to find you." She turned slowly, her sharp, calculating gaze locking onto him. For a moment, she said nothing, studying him as though trying to read his every thought. There was something about her presence, something that made the air feel thicker, charged with tension. "Mr. Goodwin," she said softly, but there was a trace of recognition in her voice. "What is it you want from me?" Archie smiled, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a chat, Miss Moreau. Nothing more. You know, I've been hearing a lot about you, about how close you were to Harrison." Her lips tightened slightly. "I knew him, yes, but that doesn't mean I knew him. You're wasting your time, Mr. Goodwin. I have nothing to say to you." "Really?" Archie raised an eyebrow. "Because I think you have plenty to say." "See, here's what I know. You and Harrison had an arrangement, a deal perhaps, something that you were both trying to keep hidden from the others, something that might have involved more than just business." Her eyes flickered, but she quickly regained control. "You're wrong. There was no deal. You're chasing shadows, Goodwin. You don't know anything about me or what I had with Harrison." Archie leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to a more intimate level. "I know you were meeting with him secretly. I know you were both worried about something, and I know, based on what I've learned, that you were the last person to see him alive." Moreau stiffened. The shift in her body language was subtle, but it was there. She was starting to feel cornered. "I don't know what you're implying, but I think you should leave me alone." "No, Miss Moreau," Archie said, now speaking with more authority. "You're not going anywhere until I get the truth. You were involved with Harrison, and I believe you had more than just a friendly relationship with him. You were blackmailing people. You had something to gain from his death, and now you're trying to cover your tracks." The room seemed to quiet as other passengers began to notice the confrontation. Moreau's calm facade was beginning to crack. She stepped closer to Archie, her voice barely above a whisper, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Goodwin," she hissed. "You have no idea what I've done, what I've been through. You think this is about money? You think I killed him for a payoff? You have no clue how deep this goes." Archie's heart raced. This was it. He had finally gotten her to react, and it was clear she was hiding something dark. But before he could press further, the door to the ballroom swung open and a figure appeared in the doorway, drawing everyone's attention. It was Graves, the businessman Archie had spoken to earlier. He walked toward them with a purposeful stride, his expression cold and determined. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Goodwin?" Graves asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Archie didn't answer immediately. He turned to Moreau, who was now visibly shaken. There was something more between them, something that connected them in a way that neither of them wanted to admit. Moreau's eyes flicked nervously toward Graves, as though seeking some kind of comfort or reassurance. Archie could feel the tension crackling between the three of them. "This conversation isn't over. Archie said, his voice hardening. "I'll find the truth one way or another, and when I do, you'll have nowhere to hide." Graves stepped forward, blocking Archie's path. "You're making a mistake, Goodwin. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Archie stared at him, feeling the weight of the situation. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Graves, and I won't stop until I've exposed the whole damn thing." The room seemed to grow colder. The passengers were now watching the interaction with rapt attention, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Archie knew he was walking a fine line, but he didn't care. He had gone too far to back down now. The confession. Later that evening, as the ship glided smoothly through the calm waters, Archie returned to his cabin, his mind still racing with everything he had uncovered. It wasn't just the confrontation with Moreau and Graves. It was the slow realization that the person he was looking for was right under his nose the entire time. He had been speaking to the wrong people, chasing after shadows. It wasn't just about blackmail or money. The deaths of Harrison and Harris were tied to something more personal, something that had been buried deep in the ship's hidden corners. Suddenly, there was a knock on his door. "Come in," Archie called, already knowing who it was. The door opened and Moreau stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She closed the door behind her, ensuring they were alone. "I'll tell you everything," she said in a broken voice, "but you have to promise me you'll protect me." "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Harrison and he had dirt on people, powerful people. But it wasn't just about money. It was about revenge. The people he was blackmailing, they weren't just businessmen. They were criminals. People who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And they knew about me. They knew what I had with Harrison, and they wanted to use me as a pawn." Her voice faltered, and she looked as if she might collapse at any moment. But Archie knew that this was the turning point. The truth was finally coming out. "I wasn't the only one involved," she continued, her voice trembling. "There was someone else. Someone with much more power than Harrison or me. Someone who knew everything, and they killed him to keep their secret safe." Archie felt a chill run down his spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It wasn't just about blackmail. It was a game of power and revenge. And the murder of Harrison was only the beginning. "Who killed him?" Archie demanded, his voice low and urgent. Moreau looked up at him, her face pale and stricken with fear. "I can't say, not yet, but you'll know soon enough." Chapter 8. The Final Pieces. The soft murmur of the ship's engines was the only sound that accompanied Archie as he sat in his cabin, his mind racing through the tangled web of lies and half-truths that had enveloped the case. It had all been building to this moment. He could feel it. Something big was about to break. The confession from Elena Moreau had been a breakthrough, but it was incomplete. She had given him enough to know that the stakes were higher than just one man's death. This was a matter of power, of secrets too dark to be exposed. But there was one more thing she had said that kept echoing in his mind. "You'll know soon enough." Archie couldn't shake the feeling that the killer, the true killer, was someone he hadn't even considered. Someone who had orchestrated this entire series of events, pulling the strings behind the scenes. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. He stood up quickly, his heart rate accelerating. He knew it wasn't Moreau again. Her fear was palpable, and it was unlikely she'd return so soon. "Come in," he called out, straightening himself. The door creaked open, and a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Graves, his cold, calculating eyes gleaming with a knowing look that instantly made Archie wary. "Mr. Goodwin," Graves said, stepping inside with his usual air of superiority. "I think we need to have a talk. You've been digging into places you don't belong." Archie didn't flinch. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. "I think it's a little late for that, Graves. I've already found more than enough to connect you to Harrison's death." "You don't get to walk away from this?" Graves chuckled, his voice low and almost amused. "You think I'm involved, Goodwin? You're mistaken. I'm a businessman, not a killer, but I can see why you'd think that. The pieces you've been putting together must make it all seem like a neat little story. But you're missing the bigger picture." Archie narrowed his eyes. "What bigger picture, Graves?" "Because I don't see much else. Harrison had blackmail material on you and others. You had the motive to silence him, and now..." He paused, leaning forward. "Now, you're trying to intimidate me, but I'm not backing down. Not this time." Graves smiled faintly, almost as though he was enjoying the game. "You're close, Goodwin. But not close enough. You don't understand who you're dealing with, and you certainly don't understand the stakes." Suddenly, Graves' tone changed, becoming more serious. "Let me explain something to you. Yes, Harrison was blackmailing people. Yes, some of us had a vested interest in making sure his threats went away. But the truth is more complicated. Harrison wasn't the only one being blackmailed, and you've been focusing on the wrong target." Archie's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? If not Harrison, then who?" Graves hesitated, his fingers twitching as if deciding whether or not to continue. "It's not about Harrison or me, Goodwin. It's about the people who think they're untouchable. The ones who have been pulling the strings from the very beginning. Harrison had crossed someone much more dangerous than any of us could have imagined. And now, we're all paying the price." The weight of Graves' words hung in the air like a thick fog. Archie was barely keeping his composure. "You're telling me that Harrison wasn't the real target?" "No, he wasn't." Graves' voice was now grim. "There's someone on this ship, someone you've been overlooking. They're the ones who killed Harrison. They're the ones who planned this whole thing." A knot tightened in Archie's stomach. "Who, Graves? Who are you talking about?" Graves took a long, slow breath, his expression unreadable. It was Captain Harris. The shocking truth. Archie froze, his thoughts momentarily spinning as he tried to process what Graves had just said. "Captain Harris?" Archie repeated, his voice incredulous. "Harris was the one behind all of this?" "He was the one pulling the strings." Graves's gaze turned cold, his face now devoid of any trace of amusement. "Harris was more than just a figurehead on the ship. He had his hands in everything. He was the one orchestrating the blackmail. He had ties to every single person who had something to lose if the truth about Harrison came out, and he wasn't just involved in Harrison's death. He was involved in the entire operation." "But why?" Archie asked, feeling a strange combination of relief and horror flood through him. What was Harris's endgame? Why kill Harrison and risk everything? "Because Harrison was the weak link," Graves replied, his voice dropping lower. "Harrison wasn't as careful as he thought he was. He was about to sell the information to the wrong people, the people who would stop at nothing to protect their own. And that's why Harris had him killed." Archie's mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. "But you were all in on it. You knew everything, Graves. So why are you telling me all this?" Graves' lips curled into a cynical smile. "Because the game has changed. The people we're dealing with aren't just businessmen or socialites. They're dangerous, and they know exactly who's been snooping around. They'll come for you next, Goodwin. You're already too deep into this. Archie's heart pounded in his chest as he took in the weight of Graves's warning. And you? What's your part in all of this? Why are you so eager to tell me? Graves stepped back, his eyes flicking toward the door. Because, Mr. Goodwin, I don't want to be caught in the crossfire. I'm done. I've said my piece. The rest is up to you. The final confrontation. As Graves turned to leave, Archie's mind was already calculating his next move. The pieces were falling into place, but the truth still felt just out of reach. Harrison's death, Captain Harris's involvement. This wasn't just a simple murder case. It was a tangled conspiracy involving people at the highest levels. People who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Graves was right about one thing. The danger wasn't over. The killer was still on board, and the ship was now a ticking time bomb. The only thing left to do was confront the person behind it all. But Archie needed more than just words. He needed evidence. He immediately headed toward the lower levels of the ship, where the hidden compartment had been found in Harris's desk. If there was something else there, something that could tie Harris directly to the murders, he needed to find it. Time was running out. As he descended into the ship's shadowy underbelly, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The killer was still out there, and they knew Archie was closing in on them, but he had no choice. He had to confront the truth head-on, no matter what. Chapter 9. The Final Clue. The night was thick with the weight of impending revelation. The soft hum of the ship's engines a constant reminder of the ticking clock. Archie couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took brought him closer to something explosive. He had finally gotten the confession from Graves. The shadowy figure behind the murder of Harrison and Captain Harris was now clearer, but the truth still felt incomplete. The pieces were scattered, but the puzzle had not yet been solved. As Archie made his way down the narrow corridor toward the lower decks, his mind worked frantically. Captain Harris, the man who had seemed so calm and controlled, the figurehead of the ship. To learn he was not just involved but orchestrating everything behind the scenes left a bitter taste in Archie's mouth. The man had used his position to conceal his true nature, hiding behind his authority as captain. And now, it was all coming unraveled. He reached the door to Harris's private office. The same place where he had found the key, the ledger, and a glimpse of the real game being played. It was time to go deeper. This time, there had to be something that connected all the dots. He knocked twice before entering, but there was no need for ceremony. He had been here before, and it was clear no one else was around. The ship was quiet at this hour, and Archie was alone with the weight of the case. As he stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanned the room. The desk was cluttered with papers, some familiar, some new. The journal that had been hidden in the compartment remained untouched. Archie couldn't ignore the sense of foreboding settling in his chest. He needed one final clue, one piece of solid evidence to break the case wide open. The hidden compartment. Archie's hand reached for the edge of the desk, pulling open the drawer that had revealed so much already. This time, he wasn't searching for paper or notes. His hand moved with purpose, searching the hidden compartment once more. The compartment was small, but there was a keyhole he had missed before, hidden beneath the false bottom of the drawer. A flash of realization hit Archie. The key. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the small metal object. Small, unassuming, yet pivotal. It was the same key he had found earlier. the one that had never fit any lock he had encountered on the ship. With a steady hand, he inserted the key into the hidden lock and turned it. There was a soft click, and the compartment opened with a quiet hiss. Inside was a single envelope, carefully sealed and marked only with the letter H in dark ink. Archie's pulse quickened. This was it. He tore open the envelope with urgency, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside there was a single piece of paper, a letter, and it was addressed to Captain Harris. As he read it, Archie's heart sank. The letter. The letter was brief but damning. Captain Harris, I trust you understand the importance of this deal. If the documents are not returned by tomorrow evening, we will take matters into our own hands. You know what's at stake. Harrison will be dealt with accordingly. The rest of the passengers must remain unaware of what is happening. Do not fail us. The signature was smudged, but the message was clear. Someone was blackmailing Harris, controlling him. Whoever had written this letter had significant power, enough to manipulate a man like Harris to use him as a pawn in their game. Archie's thoughts raced. Who would want to manipulate Harris? The answer was simple. Whoever had orchestrated the entire blackmail scheme. The people Harrison had been blackmailing were now closing in, making sure their secrets stayed buried. But it wasn't just a matter of protecting those secrets anymore. The killer, the true killer, was someone who needed to stop anyone from digging too deep. And now that someone had been revealed, the real killer. Just as Archie was about to process this new piece of evidence, a voice interrupted his thoughts. I see you found it. Archie froze. The voice was familiar but unexpected. He turned to see Mrs. Ashford standing in the doorway, a cold smile curling at the corners of her lips. Mrs. Ashford? Archie said, his voice taut with disbelief. You're the one behind this. Behind what, mister? Goodwin, she asked, stepping into the room with a measured calm. Behind the murders of Harrison and Harris? I suppose you could say that, but not in the way you think. Archie's eyes widened. It was you, wasn't it? You killed them both. Mrs. Ashford shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. No, Mr. Goodwin, I didn't kill them, but I did orchestrate their deaths, the blackmail, the power. Those were all things I controlled from the beginning, and Captain Harris was my pawn. He knew too much. I had to eliminate him before he exposed me. But why? Archie demanded, his voice rising. Why go through all of this? What was the point? Mrs. Ashford looked at him with cold detachment. Harrison was a fool. He thought he could play with fire without getting burned. He was blackmailing people who could destroy everything I've worked for. People who knew how to silence him and me if they had to. So, I made sure he was silenced first. As for Harris, well, he became a liability. He had the information and he was getting nervous. People like him don't belong in this world. Archie's mind was spinning. The woman standing in front of him was not just a victim of circumstance, she was the mastermind. She had been pulling the strings, manipulating everyone around her to protect her own position. And the key? Archie asked, still trying to wrap his mind around the full extent of her involvement. The key is a symbol, she replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. A symbol of the control I had. The people Harrison was working for, they didn't care about him. They cared about me. And I made sure they knew that. The final confrontation, Archie took a step forward, the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. You used Harris to keep your secret safe. You used Harrison to get rid of anyone who could expose you. And now you're trying to silence me. Mrs. Ashford's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Archie saw a flicker of something dangerous beneath her composed exterior. "Don't be foolish, Mr. Goodwin. You have no idea what you're dealing with. You think you've uncovered the truth, but you're only scratching the surface. People like me never get caught." "Not this time," Archie said, his voice unwavering. "This time, you'll face justice." Just as he spoke, a soft click echoed from the door. Archie turned sharply to see a figure standing in the doorway. Graves. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Not so fast, Goodwin," Graves said, his voice low and filled with desperation. "I told you this wasn't over. You're not walking out of here alive." Chapter 10. The Showdown. The tension in the room was suffocating. The words from Mrs. Ashford's confession still echoed in Archie's mind, but there was no time to process them. Graves was standing there now in the doorway, his eyes wide with desperation and fear. It was clear he was just as much a part of this web of lies and murder as the rest of them. And now he was prepared to do whatever it took to make sure his secret stayed buried. "Graves," Archie said, his voice steady but tinged with a sense of inevitability. "You're part of this, aren't you?" "You knew everything." Graves didn't respond immediately. Instead, his hand twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly, and that's when Archie knew. Graves wasn't here to talk. He was here to finish what had been started, whatever that meant. Mrs. Ashford was still standing near the desk, her expression unreadable as she watched the interaction unfold. She said nothing, but her icy gaze seemed to flick between Archie and Graves, calculating her next move. "I didn't want it to go this far," Graves said, his voice thick with guilt but also fear. I wanted control. Harrison was a threat, but he wasn't the only one. You don't understand what these people are capable of. If you knew who was really pulling the strings, you'd—" "Save it, Graves," Archie interrupted, his tone hardening. "I've heard enough. You were blackmailing Harrison. You were complicit in his murder, and you're the one who's been hiding behind that curtain of power. All for money and control." Graves's face twisted into a grimace, and for a moment, Archie thought he might attack. But instead, Graves took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You think this is just about money, Goodwin? It's not. You think we're all just pawns in a game? There's something bigger here, something you can't even begin to comprehend." Archie took a step back, his eyes never leaving Graves's. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Mrs. Ashford's confession had been one thing, but now everything was unraveling in front of him. The dark, dangerous web that had ensnared everyone on this ship was finally being exposed. Graves continued, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "There's a bigger game at play, Goodwin. You think I killed Harrison to keep a few secrets safe? This is about survival. If you don't understand that, then you're already dead." Before Archie could respond, the sound of a door creaking open behind him interrupted the standoff. He spun around, his instincts going into overdrive. But it was too late. The figure in the doorway was none other than Elena Moreau, her expression tense and filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Stop, all of you!" Moreau's voice cut through the thick silence like a blade. She stepped into the room, her gaze shifting between Archie, Graves, and Mrs. Ashford. "You don't know everything, Goodwin. There's more you don't understand." Archie's heart skipped a beat. Moreau had been the key to unlocking this entire mess. She was the link between Harrison, Ashford, and Graves. And now, she was here to finish the story. "What do you mean?" Archie demanded, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. What else is there? Moreau's eyes flickered toward Graves, then to Mrs. Ashford, before returning to Archie. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling with the weight of what she was about to say. All of this, the blackmail, the murders, the lies, it was all a cover-up, a way to protect something much bigger. You've been chasing shadows, Goodwin. The truth is right in front of you, but you're too focused on the wrong things. Enough with the games, Archie snapped. Who killed Harrison? Who's behind this? Moreau took a deep breath and stepped closer, her voice quiet but laced with undeniable emotion. I wasn't just a part of this. I was the one who started it. I was the one who manipulated Harrison. I led him to think he was in control, that he could leverage the documents he had. But I knew the whole time that it was never about him. It was about me. Archie felt a cold shiver run down his spine. You? Moreau nodded slowly, her expression filled with regret and desperation. Yes. I was the one who set it all in motion. I was the one who planned to use Harrison as a pawn to get what I wanted, but when he tried to turn the tables and blackmail me, he became expendable. Archie's mind reeled, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in ways he hadn't expected. But there was still one thing he didn't understand. But why kill Harris? Archie asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. He was your ally. You could have used him. Moreau's eyes darkened. Harris was weak. He was falling apart. I could see it in his eyes. He was going to betray me. He was going to expose the whole operation, and I couldn't let that happen. So, I had him killed, just like I did with Harrison. The showdown intensifies. Graves' expression turned from one of desperation to cold fury. You're lying, he spat, stepping toward Moreau. You think we're all gonna buy that? You think you can pin everything on me after everything you've done? But Moreau didn't flinch. She stood tall, her shoulders squared as she faced both him and Mrs. Ashford. I didn't kill Harris. You did. You killed him because he was about to reveal everything. You were too afraid to lose your grip on power, and now you're going to pay for it. Graves's face turned pale, and for the first time, he looked truly cornered. I didn't... His voice trailed off, but the fear was evident in his eyes. Archie saw it then. The guilt, the fear, the unraveling facade. Graves had been the one who had set everything in motion, and now it was all falling apart. He was part of the conspiracy, part of the network of people who had manipulated everyone aboard. The ship, including Moreau, and now the truth was coming to light. I think it's time to end this, Archie said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Graves, you're under arrest for the murder of Charles Harrison, Captain Harris, and for conspiring with Mrs. Ashford and Moreau to cover up your tracks. Moreau stepped back, her eyes shifting between the two men. You don't understand, Goodwin. It's not just about the murders. It's about the people who want us all silenced. You think arresting us will end it? It won't. Archie didn't flinch. I don't care. The truth is out, and now it's over. It ends here. The resolution. As the authorities arrived to take Graves into custody, Archie stood in the middle of the room, watching as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The ship, once a symbol of wealth and privilege, had been the backdrop to a deadly game of manipulations and deceit. The mastermind, Elena Moreau, had been exposed, but her confession came with a chilling warning. The game wasn't over. There were more powerful forces at work than anyone could imagine. But for now, the truth had won. Archie turned to Mrs. Ashford, who stood quietly in the corner, her face pale and unreadable. "What now?" Archie asked, his voice softer than before. She looked at him, her eyes hard but resigned. "Now, you walk away, Mr. Goodwin. Walk away before they come for you too." But Archie knew that wasn't possible. The game was over for now, but the shadow still loomed large, and there was still so much more to uncover.